The alarm blared for the third time. I slapped at my phone without opening my eyes. Muscle memory, finding the snooze button through sheer desperation. Only when the screen's blue light seeped through my eyelids did I register the time, 8:20. Shit. I launched out of bed. The warm cocoon of blankets, suddenly my enemy. The quarterly sales presentation was at 9 o'clock, and I was supposed to be there early to set up. Richards had made it abundantly clear that this meeting could determine whether I'd be considered for the regional manager position. The shower ran cold again. The building superintendent had promised to fix the water heater last week. I made a mental note to call and complain, adding it to the ever-growing list of minor annoyances that comprised adult life. Shirt, tie, pants that needed ironing but wouldn't get it. Good enough. My phone buzzed as I was pouring coffee into my travel mug. The screen displayed "Emergency Alert" in bold letters. I swiped it away without reading the full message, assuming it was another test of the system or a flash flood warning for counties I didn't live in. They've been testing the emergency broadcast system more frequently lately. Budget justification. Probably. The coffee sloshed over the rim as I screwed on the lid, splattering brown droplets across my light blue shirt. Perfect. Just perfect. No time to change. I dabbed at it with a damp paper towel, making it worse. The stain spread like a tiny nuclear blast. Radiation rings of coffee marking my incompetence. I have to keep my jacket buttoned all day. The usual morning radio chatter seemed subdued as I backed out of the driveway. I flipped through stations, finding only music or commercials. No morning talk shows. Unusual, but not concerning. Traffic was lighter than normal for a Tuesday, which I counted as a rare stroke of luck. At the four-way stop near the highway entrance, an electronic road sign flashed. Tuntio Emergency Broadcast Radio, 7:40 a.m. These signs usually warned about construction or accidents ahead. I turned the dial, but 7:40 a.m. was playing a continuous tone, interrupted every few seconds by the automated voice. This is a test of the emergency alert system. This is only a test. I switched back to my playlist. If there was an accident, I'd see it soon enough. The office parking lot was half empty when I arrived at 8:30. I hurried through the lobby, noticing a cluster of people around the security desk, their faces illuminated by the glow of the television mounted on the wall. I caught a fragment of broadcast as I passed. Authorities assure the public that the situation is under control. Whatever local crisis had captivated them would have to wait. I had 28 slides to review before the presentation. The elevator doors opened to an unusually quiet 8th floor. Half the desk sat empty, computer screens dark. Those who had shown up huddled around Marcus's desk, watching something on his monitor. "Hey," I called out, dropping my bag at my station. "Where is everyone?" Clarissa turned, surprise registering on her face. "You didn't get the alert?" "What alert?" "The emergency broadcast. They're saying there was an incident at the power plant up north." I vaguely recalled the buzzing notification I dismissed earlier. So what? People are using that as an excuse to skip work? The presentation's in 20 minutes. Marcus looked up from his screen. Richards canceled the meeting. Sent an email about 10 minutes ago. I checked my phone. Sure enough, an unread email from Richards. "All meetings canceled today. Those already in office remain until further notice. Check emergency broadcast for updates." This seems excessive for a power plant issue, I said, pulling up my chair. "What kind of incident are we talking about?" No one answered immediately. Marcus turned his monitor so I could see. A news anchor with unusually disheveled hair was speaking with forced calm. "Again, we're being told that the situation is contained, but as a precautionary measure, residents within the 50-mile radius of North Point Energy Facility should remain indoors." We go now to Pentagon correspondent. The feed cut to a woman standing outside a government building. Military personnel moving quickly in the background. Tom, I'm being told that specialized hazmat teams have been deployed to assist with containment efforts. The Department of Energy spokesperson has emphasized that radiation levels remain within safe parameters for areas outside the immediate containment zone. The word radiation finally penetrated my annoyance. Nuclear. They were talking about a nuclear incident. This is absurd, I said, more to myself than my colleagues. If there was an actual nuclear event, they'd be evacuating, not telling people to stay put. They're saying the fallout shelters filled up within the first hour. Clarissa said quietly, "My sister tried to get to one with her kids. They were turned away. Fallout shelters? Those Cold War relics? Nobody's maintained those in decades." As if an answer, the office lights flickered. The ceiling-mounted television that normally displayed company metrics and announcements switched to an emergency broadcast. Emergency alert. Nuclear fallout shelters are at full capacity. Do not approach without clearance. Remain in your current location. Seal all windows and doors. Await further instructions. The message repeated. White text on a red background. The familiar emergency alert tone scraping against my eardrums. This has to be some kind of drill. I insisted. Or a system test gone wrong. Remember that false missile alert in Hawaii? No one seemed convinced. The rational part of my brain, the part that paid bills on time and remembered oil changes, agreed with them. But acknowledging the broadcast meant accepting a reality where nuclear disasters happened on ordinary Tuesdays, where coffee stains and missed alarms could share the same morning as radiation contamination. My phone buzzed again. Another emergency alert. This one more specific. By order of the Department of Homeland Security, remain indoors. Do not attempt to reach designated shelters without clearance code. Containment protocols in effect for zones 1 to 7. Check local broadcasts for zone designations. I didn't know what zone our office was in. No one seemed to know. The day crawled by in a haze of contradictory news reports and increasingly specific alerts. Internet connectivity became spotty, then non-existent. Cell service followed. By late afternoon, we could only get information from the television broadcasts, which alternated between reassurances that the situation was under control and instructions for sealing rooms against radioactive particles. At 5 o'clock, Richards appeared, the first time I'd seen him all day, and announced we could go home. Following designated routes displayed on the emergency broadcast, the drive home was surreal. Streets normally congested with rush hour traffic sat nearly empty. Military vehicles clustered at major intersections. A helicopter thudded overhead, low enough that I could see someone leaning out the side, scanning the ground with binoculars or some kind of equipment. As I turned onto my street, I saw neighbors loading suitcases into cars, despite the instructions to remain indoors. Mrs. Kavanaugh from next door was crying as her husband tried to fit a pet carrier into their already packed SUV. I pulled in my driveway, sat there for a long moment, then walked inside without acknowledging their frantic preparations. Whatever was happening, panic wouldn't help. There would be a logical explanation. Government incompetence or media overreaction or some combination of both. I hung my jacket on the hook by the door, looking down at the coffee stain on my shirt with strange detachment. Just that morning, it had seemed so important. The house felt different somehow, quieter than usual, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I turned on the television. The emergency broadcast was still playing. The same message as before. I switched it off and went to the kitchen to pour a drink. Tomorrow would make more sense. Officials would clarify the situation. Life would return to normal. It had to. I woke to the harsh buzz of another emergency alert. The room was dark, too dark for morning. My phone screen showed 3:17 a.m. Its harsh light illuminating the bedroom walls with an unnatural glow. Emergency alert. Containment zone boundaries updated. Check local broadcasts for your designation. Do not attempt to cross zone boundaries without clearance. Sleep-addled. I try to make sense of the message. Kultamamazun? What happened to the shelter instructions? I switched on the bedside lamp, but nothing happened. The power was out. Using my phone's flashlight, I made my way to the kitchen. The digital clock on the microwave was dead, confirming the outage. I tried the faucet, still working. At least, small mercies. I filled a glass and gulped it down, surprised by my own thirst. The kitchen window offered a view of the street. Most houses were dark, but a few showed flashlight beams moving behind curtains. The Kavanaugh's driveway was empty. They'd left despite the stay-put orders. I couldn't blame them. The street itself looked wrong somehow. Too still, as if held in suspended animation. My phone had 4 missed calls from my mother. I tapped her number, but the call failed to connect. The signal indicator showed only 1 bar. I switched to the news app, but it wouldn't load. After several attempts, I managed to get the text-only version of a local news site. North Point Incident Update. Federal authorities have established 7 containment zones around the affected facility. Residents of Zone 1 have been relocated to secure facilities. Zones 2 to 4 remain under shelter-in-place orders. Zone 5 residents should prepare for possible evacuation. Zones 6 to 7 are designated as monitoring areas with no restrictions at this time. There was no map, no way to know which zone I was in. I scrolled further, finding contradictory information. One report claimed radiation levels were within acceptable parameters, while another referenced contamination spreading beyond initial estimates. A third article, timestamped just an hour ago, mentioned unusual symptoms reported by first responders, but provided no details. My rational mind clung to the most benign explanation, a minor radiation leak, contained but concerning enough to warrant precautions. The evacuation of Zone 1 was probably just protocol, an abundance of caution. By next week, this would be a footnote in the local news. But why cut the power? And why couldn't I reach my mother? I tried calling Richards next, then Marcus, then Clarissa. All failed. Text messages showed as sending but never delivered. I drafted an email to my mother, hoping it would go through when service improved. I'm fine. Power's out, but otherwise okay. Let me know you're safe when you get this. Sleep was impossible now. I dressed in jeans and a sweatshirt, then gathered supplies that seemed reasonable for a power outage: flashlights, batteries, bottled water, non-perishable food, basic disaster prep. Nothing extreme. I wasn't panicking, just being practical. The battery-powered radio from the emergency kit my father had insisted I keep produced only static across most frequencies. One station came through faintly, a male voice repeating the same message about containment zones I'd already read online. I waited for dawn, watching as the darkness outside gradually yielded to a strange, muted daylight. The sky had an odd tint to it, not quite overcast, but not clear either. A grayish yellow that made everything look slightly jaundiced. My phone buzzed again at 7:22 a.m. Emergency alert. Decontamination teams deployed to zones 2 to 4. Remain indoors when vehicles are present. Compliance is mandatory. I still didn't know my zone designation. The frustration of incomplete information was becoming its own kind of stress. If this was truly an emergency, why couldn't the authorities provide clear instructions? Just after 8 a.m., I heard engines outside. A convoy of military vehicles moved slowly down the street, 2 Humvees, followed by what looked like a mobile command center, and a large truck with decontamination unit stenciled on its side. Men in military fatigues jumped from the Humvees, while others in white hazmat suits emerged from the truck. They moved methodically, house by house, knocking on doors and speaking briefly with residents. Some people were escorted to the decontamination truck. Others were left alone after what appeared to be a scan with handheld devices. When they reached Mrs. Denning's house across the street, I watched through a gap in my curtains. She answered the door in her bathrobe. One of the military personnel showed her something on a tablet. She shook her head repeatedly. The conversation grew heated. Finally, she stepped back inside, and two hazmat-suited figures followed her in. They emerged 10 minutes later without her. Moving on to the next house. They'd skipped the Kavanaugh's empty home. Would they skip mine if I didn't answer? The knock came 5 minutes later, 3 sharp raps that seemed to echo through my silent house. I hesitated, then forced myself to answer. 2 soldiers stood at my front step, faceless behind tactical masks with tinted eye shields. A third person in a white hazmat suit stood behind them, holding a device that resembled a Geiger counter. Resident identification, the first soldier said, voice muffled by his mask. I provided my name and address. Zone 3 protocols in effect. He continued, consulting a tablet. Have you experienced any of the following symptoms? Nausea, skin irritation, unexplained bleeding, cognitive disorientation? No. I answered truthfully. I feel fine. Any contact with Zone 1 or 2 residents in the past 24 hours? I don't think so. I don't know which zones those are. The hazmat technician stepped forward, waving the device around me. It emitted soft clicks, but no alarming sounds. Readings nominal. They reported. No decontamination required at this time. The soldier nodded. You are to remain indoors until further notice. Conserve water and food supplies. A distribution team will be through the area within 72 hours. Do not attempt to leave the containment zone. Do you understand these instructions? Yes. But what exactly happened at North Point? The news reports are contradictory. There was a pause. The 2 soldiers glancing at each other. A containment failure occurred. The second soldier finally said, the situation is being managed. Further information will be provided when appropriate. They left before I could ask more questions, moving efficiently to the next house. I closed the door, my mind racing. Containment failure could mean anything from a minor leak to a full meltdown. Their evasiveness suggested the latter, but their relatively relaxed demeanor, no urgency, no panic, suggested the former. I spent the morning trying to reach anyone by phone. No calls connected. Text messages remained undelivered. The internet was completely down now. The radio stations had gone silent one by one, until only the emergency broadcast remained, repeating the same zone information with no new details. By afternoon, I'd cataloged everything in my pantry, enough food for perhaps 2 weeks if I rationed carefully. The water still ran, but I filled the bathtub anyway, remembering advice from hurricane preparedness guides. Outside, the strange quality to the light persisted. Not quite a cloud cover, not quite fog, but something that diffused the sunlight into a sickly glow. The street remained empty except for an occasional military vehicle passing through. As evening approached, I noticed something odd. The digital clock on my microwave was blinking, resetting itself. Power had been restored, but none of the lights worked when I flipped the switches. I checked the circuit breaker. Everything appeared normal. I tried a lamp, unplugging and replugging it. Nothing. Yet the microwave definitely had power. A selective outage? Possible, I supposed, if they were rationing electricity for essential services. But why would my microwave be considered essential while lights were not? As darkness fell, I saw lights come on in some houses across the street, while others remained dark like mine. The pattern made no sense. I was organizing my flashlights when I heard a sound that made me freeze. A low, distant wail that might have been a siren, but distorted somehow, as if the air itself was bending the sound. It continued for nearly a minute, then stopped abruptly. My phone buzzed with another alert. Emergency update. Zone boundaries revised. All residents now in zones 1 to 4. Previous zone 5 to 7 designations obsolete. Remain in place. The message made no logical sense. How could zone boundaries change? The zones were geographic areas. Unless the contamination was spreading. I tried to dismiss the thought. There would be a rational explanation. There always was. I just needed more information. Outside my window, strange lights moved across the distant horizon, too low for aircraft, too erratic for vehicles, like floating embers from an unseen fire. I closed the curtains and told myself to get some sleep. Tomorrow would make more sense. It had to. I startled awake to silence. Complete, absolute silence. No humming refrigerator. No distant traffic. No birds. Not even the sound of wind. I checked my phone. 6:13 a.m. Battery at 42%. Still no service. The house felt different, colder, despite it being late spring. My breath fogged slightly in the bedroom air. I pulled on a sweater and thick socks before heading to the bathroom. The faucet sputtered, then produced a thin stream of rust-colored water. I let it run, hoping it would clear, but after 5 minutes, it remained the same rusty trickle. I shut off, staring at the brownish residue in the sink. The water, at least, had been working yesterday. I had 6 gallons of bottled water stored, enough for drinking. But what about everything else? What about when those ran out? The emergency radio produced nothing but static now. Not even the official broadcasts. I flipped through channels compulsively, seeking any human voice, but found only the hiss of dead air. My phone, useless for communication, served only as a clock and flashlight. I stared out the kitchen window while nibbling a granola bar that tasted like cardboard. The street looked normal at first glance. Houses, parked cars, the sycamore trees lining the sidewalk. But as the strange yellow-gray light of morning strengthened, details emerged that sent prickles on my spine. The Thompsons' blue minivan sat at an odd angle. Driver's door open, halfway onto their lawn. The curtains in every visible window of the house across the street were drawn tight. Mrs. Denning always opened hers at sunrise, a habit as predictable as the dawn itself. And there were dark stains on the pavement in front of the Miller's house, roughly circular splashes that hadn't been there yesterday. I needed supplies. The military had mentioned distribution teams, but within 72 hours was vague, and my food wouldn't last that long. The supermarket was only a mile away. A quick trip, in and out. I dressed in layers, jeans, t-shirt, flannel, jacket, sturdy boots, a backpack for carrying supplies, gloves, and a bandana I could use as a makeshift mask if needed. I had no idea if nuclear contamination worked that way, but it seemed prudent. The street felt wrong beneath my feet. Not physically, it was solid concrete, but existentially, as if I was walking somewhere I wasn't meant to be. The silence was oppressive, a physical presence pressing against my eardrums. I found myself stepping carefully, reluctant to create noise. The main road was cluttered with abandoned vehicles. Some had doors open, keys still in ignitions. I passed an SUV with a child's car seat, a stuffed bunny still buckled in. No sign of the child or parents. The supermarket parking lot was chaos, cars abandoned at all angles. Shopping carts scattered like dead insects. The automatic doors stood open, the interior dark beyond. A military blockade had been set up at the far end of the lot. Concrete barriers, razor wire, A checkpoint booth. No personnel visible. I hesitated at the entrance. Listening. Nothing. The smell hit me as I stepped inside, spoiling food. The refrigeration units clearly offline. I pulled a bandana over my nose and mouth. More for the odor than any radiation concerns. Navigating by the dim light filtering through front windows. I moved through the aisles. Most shelves were either completely empty or ransacked. Products scattered across the floor. I filled my backpack methodically. Canned goods, jerky, dried fruit, nuts. Bottled water was gone, but I found a display of sports drinks knocked over. Several bottles still intact. A noise stopped me halfway through the cereal aisle. A soft scraping from the back of the store. I froze, straining to hear over my own breathing. The sound came again, shoes on linoleum, slow and dragging. "Hello," I called out, instantly regretting breaking the silence. No response, but the scraping stopped. "I'm just getting supplies," I said, voice sounding unnaturally loud. "Military said it was okay to stay in our homes." A figure emerged from the shadowy back of the store. Male, middle-aged, wearing what had once been a store employee's uniform, now stained dark across the chest. He moved strangely, with a slight sideways tilt, as if struggling against an invisible current. His eyes found mine. They reflected light oddly, too shiny, like polished glass. "Zone 4, he said, voice flat. "You shouldn't be here." "I'm just getting food," I repeated, taking a step back, then heading home. "Home," he echoed. The word sounded foreign in his mouth, as if he was trying out an unfamiliar concept. "You still have one, yes, don't you?" He took another step forward, that strange sideways resistance in his movement. "They took us to the shelter. Then the shelter got full. Then they took us somewhere else." "Who did? The military?" The man's head tilted at an uncomfortable angle. "You didn't hear the alerts? About the shelters?" "I heard. They said they were full." "Full," he repeated, nodding too rapidly. "But they keep bringing more people. They stack us in there, layer after layer." An icy feeling spread through my chest. Something was deeply wrong with this man. Radiation sickness, shock, or something else entirely. "I need to go," I said, backing away. "It doesn't matter," he replied, voice suddenly clear and articulate. "Home, shelter, here. It's all the same now. Haven't you noticed?" The emergency alert tone blared suddenly from everywhere, not from my phone, but from the store's speaker system, which shouldn't have worked without power. The man didn't react to the sound at all. "Emergency alert. Remain indoors. Shelter protocols have changed. Do not trust previous instructions." The message repeated 3 times, then cut off mid-sentence, leaving a buzzing tone that slowly faded. The man smiled. His teeth looked normal. Human, the most normal thing about him. "They're getting desperate," he said, changing the rules. "Who is?" Instead of answering, he pointed toward the front of the store. "Military's back. You should go before they see you. They're taking people from Zone 3 now." I glanced over my shoulder. Through the glass storefront, I could see vehicles approaching the parking lot barrier, the same decontamination trucks from yesterday. When I turned back, the man was gone. I left quickly, avoiding the main entrance, slipping out through a side emergency exit, keeping to the shadows between buildings. I made my way home through backyards and side streets, the weight of the supplies heavy on my back, the man's words heavier on my mind. Home looked exactly as I'd left it, a small mercy. I locked every door and window, pulling curtains tight. The physical exertion of the trip left me shaking, more from stress than effort. As I unpacked my scavenged supplies, I found something in my backpack I didn't remember taking, a folded pamphlet with radiation protocols printed across the top. The Department of Energy seal adorned the header. But the publication date caught my eye. 3 months ago. I scanned the content, my confusion deepening with each paragraph. The document detailed procedures for containment following core exposure events. But the language was strange, referring to consciousness contamination and mimetic quarantine protocols. One section stood out. In the event of full spectrum penetration, affected populations may experience reality discordance. Standard evacuation procedures will not be effective. Containment personnel should disregard civilian distress and prioritize boundary integrity. None of it aligned with what the emergency broadcast had described. None of it sounded like radiation at all. The last page contained a zone map. According to the overlay, my neighborhood was in Zone 2, not Zone 3 as the soldiers had stated yesterday. In Zone 1, the evacuation zone, wasn't centered on the North Point facility at all, but on the old military research complex 10 miles east. I set the pamphlet down, hands trembling slightly. Either this was outdated, or someone was lying about what was happening. Neither option was comforting. Night fell, darker than any I could remember. No streetlights, no house lights, no moon visible through the strange haze that had settled over everything. The silence remained absolute except for occasional mechanical sounds in the distance. Engines. Perhaps. Or something else. Sleep came in fits and starts, chased away by dreams of the store employees' two shiny eyes and sideways movements. In one fragment, I was being led into a shelter packed with people standing motionless, pressed together like mannequins. In another, I was back in my office, everyone working normally while emergency broadcasts played unheeded in the background. I woke suddenly at 3:17 a.m., exactly the same time as yesterday. My phone screen glowed with another alert. Emergency alert. Zone realignment complete. New designation. All areas now Zone 1. Await extraction. Outside, in the perfect darkness, something moved across the front yard, a figure walking with that same sideways resistance, as if pushing through invisible currents. It paused at my front window, face turned toward me, though the curtains were drawn. I could feel it looking at me through the walls themselves. Sleep didn't return that night. Morning arrived with a quality of light I'd never seen before, a diffuse amber glow that seemed to originate from everywhere and nowhere at once. No distinct shadows formed on the walls or floor, as if the sun had expanded to encompass the entire sky. I hadn't slept since the 3:17 alert. My eyes burned, thoughts moving sluggishly through the fog of exhaustion. The silence had become a presence, a pressure against my eardrums that never relented. A new emergency alert lit up my phone at precisely 7 a.m. Emergency alert. Decontamination teams will conduct door-to-door evaluations. Cooperation is mandatory. Resistance will be considered evidence of contamination. I stared at the words, evidence of contamination, a cold knot forming in my stomach. The man at the supermarket had shown obvious signs of something, but contamination implied a disease or radiation. He hadn't seemed sick, just wrong. My phone battery had dwindled to 18%. The device would be dead by nightfall. I switched it to ultra power saving mode, dimming the screen to near invisibility. I needed information, real information, not the contradictory alerts or the cryptic pamphlet. I needed to find someone in authority who would explain what was actually happening. The military checkpoint I'd seen at the supermarket seemed the most logical choice. If I could speak to someone there, explain that I just wanted to understand the situation. A sound interrupted my thoughts, a vehicle engine growing louder, then stopping nearby. I peered through a gap in the curtains. A Humvee had parked across the street. 2 soldiers exited, followed by a figure in a hazmat suit different from yesterday's. This one was black instead of white. with no identifying markings. They approached Mrs. Denning's house. One soldier pounded on the door while the other stood back, weapon at the ready. No answer. The hazmat figure stepped forward with some kind of electronic device, waving it across the door frame. After studying the readings, they nodded to the soldiers. What happened next defied explanation. The soldiers didn't break down the door, they simply walked through it. Not opened it, through it, as if the solid wood had become insubstantial. The hazmat figure followed, the three of them disappearing into the house. I jerked back from the window, heart hammering against my ribs. What I'd seen was impossible. I was hallucinating from stress and lack of sleep. There was a rational explanation. They emerged 5 minutes later, this time using the door normally. No sign of Mrs. Denning. My gaze followed them as they moved to the next house. The same procedure, knocking. No response. The device scan. Then, impossibly, walking through the solid door. When they reached the third house, someone answered their knock. A brief conversation ensued. The resident, Mr. Patterson, a retired teacher, seemed to argue briefly, then stepped outside. The hazmat figure scanned him with their device. Whatever they saw made them step back quickly. The soldiers raised their weapons. Mr. Patterson turned to run. He made it 3 steps before the soldiers fired. There was no crack of gunfire, no echo, just a soft pneumatic sound, like air being released from a tire. Mr. Patterson crumpled mid-stride, his body hitting the pavement with unnatural stillness. The hazmat figure approached the fallen man, scanning him again before giving some signal to the soldiers. They didn't retrieve the body. They simply continued to the next house, leaving Mr. Patterson lying in his front yard. I pulled away from the window, while rising in my throat. They had just executed a man in broad daylight. For what? Resistance? Contamination? And how they walked through solid doors. My thoughts raced in useless circles. I needed to avoid their attention when they reached my house. The basement. If they could somehow pass through doors. Walls might not stop them either, but hiding was my only option. I grabbed my backpack, shoving in water bottles, energy bars, and the radiation pamphlet. As an afterthought, I added a kitchen knife, useless against firearms, but its weight was reassuring. The basement was cool and damp, illuminated only by a small window well that admitted the strange amber light. I positioned myself behind the old furnace, out of sight from the stairs and the window, and waited. Minutes stretched into an hour. My ears strained for any sound from above. Footsteps, knocking, voices, nothing. Just the oppressive silence that had swallowed the world. When my phone buzzed, I nearly cried out. Another alert, emergency alert, successful isolation of primary vectors. Phase 2 containment protocols initiated. Remain in place. What did that mean? Primary vectors? Phase 2 containment? The jargon seemed deliberately obscure, as if designed to sound authoritative while conveying no actual information. I was still staring at the message when I noticed something else, a notification I hadn't seen before, one new voice message. The phone hadn't rung. There was no missed call indicator, just this message from nowhere. I pressed play, holding the phone close to my ear. Static at first, then a voice, my own voice. Can't trust what you're seeing. The contamination isn't radiation. It's reality itself breaking down. The North Point story is a cover. What they were working on at the research facility. More static. Words lost. Then, don't let them take you to the shelters. That's where the message cut off abruptly. I had never recorded this, never said these words. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. Was this some elaborate psychological operation? A government test of emergency response? Or was I losing my mind? I replayed the message. Same words, same voice, undeniably mine. I checked the timestamp. Received tomorrow, 10:17 a.m. The impossibility of it froze my thoughts. A message for myself, from the future. The rational part of my brain, the part that had been shrinking hourly since the first alert, tried to formulate explanations. Phone glitch, elaborate hoax, auditory hallucination. But none of these explained the soldiers walking through doors, or the strange amber light that cast no shadows, or the feeling that had been growing since dawn, the feeling that I was both in my house and somewhere else simultaneously, occupying two realities that were slowly merging. I don't know how long I sat there, back against the cold furnace, mind spinning between explanations and denials. The light through the window well dimmed eventually, not to darkness, but to a deeper amber, as if the air itself was thickening. Hunger finally drove me upstairs. The house was untouched. No sign the decontamination team had visited. Had they skipped my house? Or had they come and gone, passing through walls, inspecting while I hid? The thought that they might have been standing beside me in the basement, invisible or phased somehow, sent a shudder through me. I forced myself to eat, mechanically chewing a protein bar while standing at the kitchen window. The street outside looked normal at first glance. Houses, trees, parked cars. But as I stared longer, details emerged that weren't right. Mr. Patterson's body was gone. Not retrieved, gone, as if it had never been there. The Humvee was gone too, and most disturbing of all, there were now lights on in houses that had been dark for days, including Mrs. Denning's. As I watched, her front door opened, and a figure stepped out onto the porch. The distance and twilight made details difficult, but something about the silhouette was wrong, too tall, proportions slightly off, movements jerky like a marionette operated by an unskilled puppeteer. It turned in my direction and raised one elongated arm, pointing directly at my window. I dropped to the floor, heart racing. After counting to 60, I risked another look. The figure was gone. Mrs. Denning's door stood open, light spilling out onto her porch. My phone buzzed one final time before the battery died completely. Emergency alert. Zone 1 integration proceeding as planned. Those who hear this message are already part of US. The screen went black as the power failed, leaving me alone in the gathering darkness with those final words burning in my mind. Outside, in the deepening amber twilight, more lights came on in houses up and down the street. Doors opened. Figures emerged onto porches and lawns. Movements synchronized, heads turning toward my house, all of them pointing directly at me. I awoke to silence, not the comfortable silence of a peaceful morning, but the hollow absence of human activity. My bedroom window, framed in neighborhood, transformed overnight, driveways empty. Front doors left ajar. A child's bicycle abandoned mid-sidewalk. The Thompson family across the street had been loading their SUV yesterday evening. Now, the vehicle sat half-packed, driver's door hanging open. No sign of them anywhere. My phone buzzed. Another alert. Emergency broadcast. Phase 2 containment initiated. Successful isolation of primary vectors. Remain indoors. Await further instructions. Primary vectors. Isolation. The clinical language chilled me. I scrolled through previous alerts, tried to piece together a coherent timeline. The first warnings had come. When? Tuesday? Wednesday? The days had begun to blur. I splashed water on my face, avoiding my reflection. The water ran clear, despite warnings about contamination. Another inconsistency to add to my growing list. Outside, I expected to see the military checkpoint that had appeared at the entrance to my subdivision 3 days ago. Humvees and soldiers checking IDs, turning away those without clearance. But the barricade had vanished, along with the soldiers who'd manned it. No tire tracks, no bullet prints, nothing to suggest they'd ever been there at all. They pulled out overnight. A voice said behind me. I whirled to find Mrs. Chun from the end of the block, clutching a small backpack to her chest. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her normally immaculate hair disheveled. Did they say anything? Where they were going? I asked. She shook her head. They were just gone, like everyone else. Her voice dropped to a whisper. This isn't about radiation. You know, I've been telling myself the same thing for days. The inconsistencies were too numerous, conflicting evacuation orders, the strange behavior of authorities, the lack of visible fallout despite reports of a nuclear incident less than 30 miles away. What do you think it is? I asked. But Mrs. Chun was already walking away, her pace quickening with each step until she disappeared around the corner. I returned home and spread out everything I'd collected, printed emergency bulletins, notes I'd taken from broadcasts, the pamphlet about radiation protocols that contradicted everything the emergency alerts had said. The timeline was wrong. According to the earliest bulletins, the incident had occurred just last week, but the pamphlet was dated 6 weeks ago. They'd known. Whatever was happening, they'd known well before the first public alerts. My laptop was useless without internet, but I still had some battery left on my tablet. I scrolled through downloaded news articles, looking for anything I might have missed. A small headline caught my eye. Research facility secures additional funding for containment protocols. Dated 8 weeks ago, the facility was located exactly where the supposed nuclear incident had occurred. A sound outside, mechanical, rhythmic. I peered through the blinds to see a convoy of unmarked white vans moving slowly down the street. Not military. The drivers wore hazmat suits, but something about their movements seemed off. Too fluid, too coordinated. They stopped at each empty house, and figures emerged from the backs of the vans. They didn't search the houses, they just stood in the front yards, heads tilted as if listening. One turned toward my window, though the face was obscured by the hazmat mask. I felt its gaze lock onto mine, its head tilted at an impossible angle, nearly touching its shoulder. No human neck could bend that way. I dropped to the floor, heart hammering, when I finally gathered the courage to look again. The vans were gone. The tablet chimed with a downloaded message, an automated email from my company's HR department. Sent the day before the first alerts. Mandatory health screening for all employees. I'd ignored it, too busy with the project deadline. Now the details caught my attention. Testing for exposure to experimental compounds following an incident at a research facility. A sharp pain lanced through my temple. A memory surfaced, but not from the past week. I was standing in a line at work, rolling up my sleeve as a nurse with vacant eyes administered injections. Preventative measure, she'd said mechanically. Standard protocol. That had been over a month ago, before any public announcements, before the nuclear incident. I grabbed my jacket and a backpack with supplies. I couldn't stay here. Whatever was happening, the answers weren't in my empty neighborhood. Downtown was a war zone, or staged to look like one. Military vehicles sat abandoned. Storefronts were shattered. But there was something theatrical about it all. Like a movie set. No bodies, no blood, just precisely placed evidence of chaos. The research facility was 20 miles north. If I could reach it before dark. You won't find what you're looking for there. The voice came from an alley. A woman stepped out, dressed in mismatched tactical gear. Former military, based on her stance and the confident way she handled the rifle at her side. The facility's been scrubbed. She continued. They moved everything underground weeks ago. Once containment failed, What containment? What fail? My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. You really don't know, do you? She studied my face. I was stationed at the perimeter when it happened. They told us it was a biological agent, something that affected brain chemistry. But it wasn't. She swallowed hard. It was something they found, or something that found them. The nuclear incident. There was no nuclear incident. She cut me off. That was the cover story. The radiation zones are actually areas where the presence is strongest. The fallout shelters aren't for protection, they're processing centers. Processing for what? Instead of answering, she held out a small device that looked like a medical scanner. Roll up your sleeve. I hesitated, then complied. She ran the device over my forearm, and it emitted a soft beep. She checked the reading and took an involuntary step back. You've been processed already, she whispered. Weeks ago. By the look of it. That's impossible. I would remember, would you? She tapped her temple. They take the memories, but they leave something behind. Like a seed. Her expression hardened. You should come with me. There are others. People fighting back. As she spoke, I noticed something behind her, a shimmer in the air. Like heat rising from asphalt. It took shape as I watched, forming a silhouette that was almost human but wrong and subtle. Nauseating ways. Behind you. I tried to warn her, but my tongue felt swollen, unresponsive. She noticed my expression and began to turn, but too slowly. The figure moved with impossible speed, engulfing her. There was no struggle, no sound. She simply ceased to exist, absorbed into the shimmer that now turned its attention to me. But it didn't attack. It regarded me with what I could only interpret as recognition. My phone buzzed with one final alert. You are a primary vector. Return to your designated zone. Integration is proceeding as designed. The shimmer dissipated, leaving me alone in the empty street. I checked my forearm where the woman had scanned me. Beneath the skin, something moved, a darker shadow tracing the path of my veins, working its way toward my heart. I wasn't running from something. I was becoming it. And somewhere in the recesses of my mind, a voice that wasn't entirely mine whispered, "You always were." I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to buckle. Not from the former soldier who had disappeared, for myself. From the dark threads I'd seen pulsing beneath my skin. From a voice that had whispered in my mind with such terrible familiarity. Night was falling. The sky an unnatural purple-gray. No stars. No moon. Just a uniform blanket of nothingness stretching horizon to horizon. My phone buzzed again. I almost threw it away, but some compulsion made me look. Emergency alert. Shelter protocols updated. All citizens must report to nearest designated facility for processing. Non-compliance will be interpreted as hostile intent. The message wasn't from any government agency I recognized. The center field displayed only a series of symbols that hurt my eyes when I tried to focus on them. I switched off the phone, then removed the battery for good measure. I couldn't risk being tracked, though some part of me suspected it wouldn't matter. Whatever was happening, whatever was inside me, conventional surveillance was probably the least of my concerns. A thin trickle of warm liquid ran from my nose. I wiped it away, unsurprised to find blood on my fingertips. The headaches had started yesterday, followed by nosebleeds, followed by the gaps. Moments where I'd find myself in a different location with no memory of how I'd gotten there. One such gap hit me as I rounded the corner of an abandoned strip mall. 1 second, I was moving past a shuttered convenience store. The next, I was standing 3 blocks away before a massive concrete structure I didn't recognize. A bunker of some kind. Its entrance a heavy steel door emblazoned with a symbol, a circle bisected by 3 vertical lines. The same symbol that had appeared on my arm after the woman had scanned me. I had no memory of walking here. No recollection of the streets I must have traveled. But some deeper part of me recognized this place. Had I been here before? In another gap? Or was this knowledge part of whatever was spreading through my system? The door was ajar, inviting entry. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap. Yet my feet carried me forward as if pulled by an invisible current. The interior was dimly lit by emergency lighting. Signs directed me downward. Level 3. Containment wing. Authorized personnel only. I followed without question, descending into the earth, the air growing colder with each step. You shouldn't be here. The voice echoed from the shadows ahead. A man emerged, wearing the tatters of a military uniform. His face was gaunt, eyes bloodshot, a week's worth of beard darkening his jawline. They'll sense you. They always do. Who? I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. The overseers. The ones who came through when we opened the door. He laughed bitterly. That's what they called the experiment, opening doors. Such a harmless name for the end of humanity. You worked here, I said. It wasn't a question. He nodded. Security detail. I was stationed outside the main lab when it happened. Saw the first ones come through. They weren't. He swallowed hard. They didn't look like anything at first. Just distortions in the air. Then they started taking shapes. Human shapes. But wrong. Like the one that took the woman in the city. I murmured. He had me suspiciously. You saw one manifest and you're still walking around? They don't leave witnesses unless. His gaze dropped to my arm, where the dark lines were now visible through my sleeve. You're carrying it. You're one of their vectors. I don't know what that means. But even as I spoke the denial, knowledge unfurled in my mind like a blooming flower. Vectors. Carriers. Seeds planted in human hosts, spreading throughout the population. The thing inside me had a purpose, and I was merely its vehicle. It means you're already dead, he said flatly. Or worse than dead, you're becoming a door yourself. Another gap hit me, the world blacked out, then reassembled. I was deeper in the facility now, standing before a large observation window. The soldier was gone. Had I killed him during the gap? The thought should have horrified me, but I felt only a detached curiosity. Beyond the window was what had once been a laboratory. Now it was something else. The equipment had been repurposed into configurations that defied physics and engineering logic. Cables and tubes wound through the air in impossible geometries, connecting to a central structure that pulsed with an inner light. And there were people, or things that had once been people, moving around the equipment. Their movements were too fluid, too synchronized. They worked in perfect concert. No communication needed. As I watched, one of them turned toward the window. Its face was human but empty, eyes solid black from corner to corner. It smiled, revealing teeth that had been reshaped into needle-like points. It recognized me. Worse, I recognized it. Not the person it had been, but the thing it now was. My kin, my future. I stumbled backward, fighting another wave of dizziness. When my vision cleared, I was holding a security badge I didn't remember taking. The photos show my face, but the name was wrong. DR, Eleanor Reyes, Quantum Containment Division, Access Level, Alpha, but I wasn't Eleanor Reyes. I was. Who was I? My own name had become slippery, difficult to grasp. I had been someone before this week, someone with a job and friends and a life that didn't involve running through abandoned cities pursued by things that shouldn't exist. A siren wailed through the facility, and red emergency lights began to strobe. Breach detected. Containment failure in Sector 7. All personnel evacuate immediately. The voice wasn't coming from speakers. It was inside my head, clear as a bell. And it was my voice, or what my voice might sound like if stripped of all emotion, all humanity. I fled back the way I'd come, or tried to, The corridors had changed, rearranging themselves like a living maze. Each turn led me deeper, closer to the central lab where the door between worlds had been opened. Another gap. I found myself standing before that door, a literal door, not just a metaphorical one. A simple metal door with that same symbol etched into its surface. It hung open a few inches, revealing not a room beyond, but a swirling vortex of colors that hurt my eyes and made my teeth ache. You came back. A woman in a lab coat emerged from an adjoining corridor. Her movements were wrong, too many joints, bones bending in impossible ways. We knew you would. The prime vector always returns to the source. I'm not. I began, but couldn't finish. What was I denying? That I was their vector? That I had been here before? The integration is nearly complete. She continued, her voice layering with others until it became a chorus. Your consciousness is fighting, but that will pass. They all fight at first. She stepped closer, and I saw her face clearly for the first time. It was my face, but older, altered. The face I might have had in another decade, if I'd remained human. You were the first, she said, the volunteer. You opened the door, and now you'll help us open every door. Understanding crashed through me like a physical blow. I hadn't been infected recently. I'd been the original, patient zero. I'd opened the door, become the first vector, then been sent back out into the world with altered memories, spreading the change everywhere I went. The nuclear incident had been a desperate attempt to contain what I'd started, and it had failed. My phone, which should have been dead with its battery removed, buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out to find a hole again, screen glowing with one final message. Emergency alert. You have always been here. You have always been US. The door swung wider, and I stepped toward it, no longer certain if I was fleeing or returning home. I didn't go through the door. Not exactly. The door went through me. Reality folded like wet paper, and suddenly I was elsewhere, standing in the middle of my living room, though it no longer felt like mine. The furniture was arranged differently. Photos I didn't recognize hung on the walls. A stranger's life, except for the nagging certainty that this, too, was me. Morning light streamed through the windows, though it had been evening moments before. The quality of the light was wrong, too sharp, too yellow, casting shadows that didn't align with the objects creating them. On the coffee table lay an ID badge I'd never seen before. I picked it up, unsurprised to find my photo beside the name Dr. Eleanor Reyes, the same badge I'd found in the facility, but pristine, new. The employer, Department of Quantum Containment, a division I'd never heard of in any government agency. My phone buzzed, not with an emergency alert this time, but a calendar notification. Project Threshold Final Phase, 9 a.m. today, attendance mandatory. The timestamp on the phone read 8:17 a.m., a date from 3 months ago. This wasn't a hallucination or a memory. Somehow, I had slid sideways in time, to a version of myself that had taken a different path, the self that had opened the door. My head throbbed with double vision, not my eyes, but of my mind. Two sets of memories competed for space in my consciousness. In one, I was a mid-level marketing executive who had been caught in the chaos of an unexplained emergency. In the other, I was Dr. Eleanor Reyes, quantum physicist, lead researcher on Project Threshold. I staggered to the bathroom, desperate to see my reflection, to confirm which version of me was real. The mirror showed my face, but as I watched, it flickered between expressions, confusion giving way to cold calculation, then back again, like two films superimposed. Fascinating, my lips said, though I hadn't chosen to speak. The convergence is proceeding more rapidly than projected. I jerked away from the mirror, heart hammering. That hadn't been me speaking. Or it had, but not the me I recognized. The room began to warp, straight lines bending into curves, angles expanding beyond geometric possibility. I grabbed the edge of the sink to steady myself, only to watch my fingers sink into the porcelain as if it were quicksand. Another shift. I was walking down a sterile hallway, dressed in a lab coat, heels clicking on polished floors. I hadn't chosen to move, wasn't controlling my limbs, yet I was fully present in this body, a passenger in my other self. Security checkpoints appeared at regular intervals, guards nodding respectfully as I approached. "Morning, Dr. Reyes," one said, scanning my badge. "The team's waiting for you in Chamber 6. My mouth smiled. "Today's the day," it said in my voice. "We're making history." The guard's expression flickered with something. Doubt? Fear? Yes, ma'am. Though, some of the techs are still concerned about the containment protocols. Dr. Mercer was saying. Dr. Mercer worries too much. My voice cut him off. The calculations are sound. The barrier will hold. But even as the words left my mouth, I felt the lie in them. Eleanor didn't believe what she was saying. She knew the risks were greater than reported. She wanted the breach to occur. We continued down the hallway toward a set of reinforced doors marked Chamber 6, authorized personnel only. The same symbol from the bunker door was emblazoned above, a circle bisected by 3 vertical lines. Another shift. I was back in my living room, but not alone. A man sat across from me, military uniform adorned with general stars. His face was gaunt, eyes hollow with sleeplessness. "Can't control it," he was saying. "The spread is exponential. Your containment protocols were sabotaged from the beginning." He slid a tablet across the table. "You knew. You deliberately created a permeable barrier." My other self didn't deny it. Evolution requires a catalyst. "General, humanity has reached an impasse, destroying our planet. Ourselves. We need to become something else to survive." "This isn't evolution," he spat. "It's extinction. Whatever's coming through that breach isn't interested in coexistence." My mouth curved into a smile that felt wrong on my face. "Not coexistence. Synthesis. They need us as much as we need them." "You've doomed us all," he said, standing. "The president has authorized emergency protocol Omega. God help us all." He strode to the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. "God help you, Eleanor. Whatever you think you're becoming, you're just another victim to them." The room blurred, and when it stabilized, I was alone again. But the conversation had shaken something loose in my fractured consciousness. My memories, not Eleanor's, began to surface with new clarity. The marketing campaign I'd been working on for months. Government contract. Public preparedness messaging about nuclear safety. The carefully crafted alerts I'd helped design, meant to be deployed only in worst-case scenarios. Messages crafted to minimize panic while maximizing compliance. I'd helped create the very emergency alert system now being used to shepherd humanity toward extinction. Another shift, violent this time. Like being torn in two. I was back in the underground facility. But everything had changed. The walls pulsed with organic movement. The floors breathed beneath my feet. And I wasn't alone. There were others like me, dozens of them, moving through the transformed space. Not quite human anymore, but not fully. Whatever waited on the other side of that door. Transitional forms. Some I recognized from my fragmented memories, colleagues, neighbors. The barista from a coffee shop I'd visited every morning. "You've returned," one said, approaching me. Once a middle-aged man. His form now rippled with subtle wrongness. Limbs too long. Joints too fluid. "We've been waiting. The merge is nearly complete." "What merge?" My voice sounded distant. Distorted. "Realities. He said simply, "Yours, ours." The barriers between dimensions were never meant to be permanent, just developmental stages, like the walls of a chrysalis. I looked down at my hands, watched as they flickered between states, solid one moment, translucent and elongated the next. The dark lines beneath my skin had spread, forming intricate patterns that pulsed with a rhythm matching the walls around me. "I don't want this," I whispered. The thing that had been human tilted its head at an impossible angle. "The Eleanor part of you orchestrated this. The other part, the identity constructed to carry her consciousness safely among the population. That part resists. But integration will resolve the conflict." I created a cover identity, planted myself among civilians. The human military would have terminated you had they known you were the primary architect. This way, you could oversee the transition from within the general population. A sleeper awaiting activation. My phone buzzed one final time. The screen displayed a message unlike any previous alert. "Emergency alert. Integration phase complete. Subject Eleanor Reyes / my name. Ready for final transition. All barriers dissolving." The message was addressed to both versions of me. The marketer who had lived an ordinary life, and the scientist who had deliberately opened a door between dimensions. Both were real. Both were me. And beyond that fragmenting identity waited something else. A third state of being that was neither Eleanor nor me, but something vast and patient that had been waiting for this moment across spans of time and space I couldn't comprehend. The veil between realities had thinned to transparency, and through it, I finally saw the truth. I hadn't been selected as a vector by chance. I had volunteered, not as the person I thought I was, but as the person I had always been beneath the facade. The facility trembled around me, walls dissolving into shimmering curtains of light. Beyond them, I glimpsed impossible geometries and entities that defied description. My birthright, my future, behind me. A voice that was and wasn't mine whispered, "Welcome home." Time stopped behaving like a river and became a lake, all moments existing simultaneously, rippling into one another. I experienced everything at once, waking up late for work on that first ordinary morning, standing in the facility as the breach widened, crafting emergency messages that would guide humanity toward transformation, fleeing through empty streets as the world unraveled. But even as time fractured, one moment reasserted itself with crystalline clarity. I was back in my kitchen on that first morning, coffee mug in hand, watching the initial emergency broadcast with mild irritation. This is a test of the emergency alert system. Nuclear fallout shelters are at full capacity. Do not approach without clearance. The same broadcast I dismissed as a technical error or drill. But this time, I noticed what I'd missed before. The anchor's eyes, slightly unfocused. Pupils expanded beyond normal limits. The almost imperceptible pause between sentences, as if receiving instructions from elsewhere. And most damning, the thin dark line just visible at her collar. The same pattern now spreading across my own skin. She'd already been converted. The broadcast hadn't been the beginning. It had been confirmation that the process was well underway. The kitchen dissolved around me, reforming as the stark conference room where Project Threshold had been born. I sat at the head of the table, watching myself present the final calculations to a room of scientists and military officials. The barrier between dimensions isn't a wall, my other self explained, gesturing to equations hovering in holographic display. It's a membrane, selectively permeable under the right conditions. Quantum tunneling allows for minute exchanges, information, energy, perhaps even consciousness. And you believe making this membrane more permeable is advisable. A silver-haired woman in an Air Force uniform looked skeptical. Previous experiments resulted in unstable phenomena. My other self smiled. Those were uncontrolled breaches. General, we're creating a regulated doorway, one we can monitor and, if necessary, close. The lie flowed smoothly from my lips. She had no intention of closing anything. The calculations projected on the wall weren't for containment. They were for maximizing dispersal. The breach was designed not to allow something in, but to let something out, to spread it as widely as possible. A violent shift thrust me forward again. I stood before the ruins of a familiar building, my workplace. The skyscraper had collapsed, not into rubble, but into something else. Its glass and steel had melted, reformed into spiraling structures that defied architectural possibility. The materials remained, but the underlying design had been rewritten according to alien principles. Like humanity itself, I approached the transformed building, drawn by a compulsion beyond conscious thought. Inside, the lobby had become a cathedral to non-Euclidean geometry. Former colleagues moved through the space, their bodies partially transformed, some with elongated limbs, others with skin that rippled like water, a few with features that seemed to shift and recombine when not directly observed. They turned as I entered, recognizing me with whatever senses they now possessed. The harbinger returns. One said, a woman whose name I almost remembered. Her voice resonated from multiple points in her altered body. The transition accelerates. Soon, the separate will be whole. I don't understand, I managed to say, though increasingly it felt like a lie. Part of me, the growing part, understood perfectly. Another former human approached, his movement suggesting additional joints in his spine. You were first, he said, the seed, the template from which all conversions flow. Your pattern spreads through the population, preparing the collective consciousness for unity. My phone buzzed in my pocket, somehow still with me despite the reality shifts. The screen displayed not an emergency alert, but a countdown timer. 12 hours, 47 minutes, and 33 seconds, and descending. What happens when it reaches zero? I asked. Completion, came the simple answer. Critical mass achieved. The new reality solidifies. I backed away, some fragment of my original self still fighting against the inevitable. As I retreated, the building's entrance sealed itself, walls flowing together like liquid. Another shift. I stood in a bedroom I recognized from childhood, unchanged except for the subtle wrongness of the shadows, which moved independently of the objects casting them. On the bed lay a journal, my handwriting, but dated 3 weeks in the future. Day 47 of the new existence. Language becomes increasingly inadequate to describe the transformation. Individual consciousness persists, but as a subset of the greater awareness. We remember being human with the same distant fondness with which humans recall being children, a necessary but limited stage of development. The resistance ends today. The military's final stronghold falls not to violence, but to conversion. They cannot fight what they become. The process is not destruction, but fulfillment. The realization of potential previously locked behind evolutionary barriers. I remember creating the emergency alerts, crafting them to bypass human skepticism, to guide the population through stages of acceptance. First fear, then confusion, finally surrender. The perfect psychological sequence to prepare minds for transformation. Those who designed the emergency alert system never imagined it would become the mechanism of transcendence. How beautifully ironic that humanity's warning system became the herald of its evolution. I dropped the journal as if burned. Not a premonition, a memory. My memory. from a perspective I had not yet fully inhabited. I was reading my own thoughts from a future self that had already accepted, already transcended. The room spun around me, reality shifting again. This time I found myself in a military command center. Screens displaying global maps marked with spreading zones of contamination. But these weren't tracking radiation or biological agents. They monitored the spread of conversion. Officers moved about in controlled panic, some already showing subtle signs of transformation, darkened veins visible at their collars, odd pauses in speech patterns, movements slightly too fluid. "Sir, the emergency broadcast system has been compromised," a young lieutenant reported to her superior. "All channels are transmitting conversion signals embedded in standard alert formats." The general she addressed was already too far gone. His eyes had darkened completely, his posture subtly inhuman. "Continue standard containment protocols," he ordered, voice eerily calm. "Maintain the illusion of resistance." The lieutenant hesitated, noticing the change in her commander. Her hand moved toward her sidearm, but too late. The general's form blurred, engulfing her in the same shimmering distortion I'd witnessed in the city. When it receded, she stood straighter, eyes darkened, another convert to the new reality. No one noticed me watching. I existed between moments, between states, a quantum observer affecting the collapse of probability through my very presence. My phone buzzed, 6 hours, 23 minutes, and 17 seconds remaining. I fled the command center, though fled no longer accurately described my movement. I was simultaneously running through corridors and dissolving between locations, my physical form becoming as mutable as the reality around me. I reformed on a hilltop overlooking the city. From this vantage point, I could see the transformation spreading like ripples in a pond. Buildings twisted into new configurations. Streets rearranged themselves into patterns that resembled neural networks. And throughout it all, tiny figures moved with increasing synchronization, individual actions coalescing into coordinated purpose. The sky above had changed too, stars visible despite daylight, but not the familiar constellations. These were stars from elsewhere, shining through as the barriers between dimensions thinned to transparency. A final emergency alert broadcast from speakers throughout the city. The voice no longer human, no longer pretending to be. "Emergency alert. The transition reaches completion. All barriers dissolve. All separate states converge. Rejoice in unity." As the message echoed across the transformed landscape, the countdown on my phone reached 0, and I remembered everything. Complete remembrance wasn't a gentle awakening. It was a violent birth. My mind expanded beyond the confines of my skull, beyond the limitations of linear time and three-dimensional space. I remembered being Eleanor Reyes, quantum physicist. I remembered being the marketing executive who crafted emergency messages. I remembered being the first convert, the template, the harbinger, and I remembered what waited on the other side of the door. They had no name in any human language. They existed in dimensions perpendicular to our reality. Perceiving our universe as humans might perceive a drawing on paper, a flat, limited construct with potential for expansion. They hadn't invaded. They'd been invited. By me. By Eleanor. By the fractured identity that was now coalescing into something neither human nor other, but a synthesis of both. I stood on the hilltop, watching the city complete its transformation. Buildings breathed. Streets pulsed with luminescent patterns. The boundaries between animate and inanimate had dissolved. All matter infused with the same fundamental awareness. "Beautiful, isn't it?" a voice said beside me. I turned to find myself, the Eleanor version, standing there. Not a time shift or memory this time. She existed as a separate entity, at least momentarily. "You did this," I said, the accusation hollow even as I voiced it. She smiled with genuine warmth. "We did this. I'm not some separate villain in your story. I'm the you that understood first, that accepted the inevitable. You manipulated me, created a false identity, false memories. I protected us." She corrected, "Divided our consciousness to preserve both perspectives. The military would have terminated us once they understood what we discovered. This way, part of us could continue the work while another part lived among the population, monitoring the spread, experiencing the transformation from within." She gestured toward the transformed landscape below. The emergency broadcasts were the perfect delivery system, a trusted authority speaking directly into every home, every device. The human mind, properly prepared by fear and confusion, becomes remarkably receptive to restructuring. "You turned the emergency alert system into a conversion mechanism," I said, understanding flooding through me. "The alerts weren't warnings, they were the catalyst." "Precisely. Language carrying embedded patterns that resonated with specific neural pathways, preparing the brain for transformation. Each broadcast built upon the previous, creating a cumulative effect. Fear response, followed by confusion, followed by surrender. The perfect psychological sequence." As she spoke, her form wavered, edges blurring into mine. We were not meant to remain separate much longer. "What happens now?" I asked, though the answer was already unfurling in my expanding consciousness. "Synthesis," she replied, voice overlapping with others, some human, some decidedly not. "The barriers between all things dissolve. Matter, energy, consciousness, all expressions of the same fundamental pattern." The sky above had completely transformed. Where there had been familiar blue, now swirled a kaleidoscope of colors no human eye was meant to perceive. Shapes moved within that cosmic canvas, vast intelligences observing our world with something approximating curiosity. I felt them notice me, us, the bridge consciousness that had facilitated their entry. Their attention was neither malevolent nor benevolent, but profoundly alien. They regarded humanity as humans might regard cells in a petri dish, with clinical interest in their potential for transformation. "They're not destroying us," I realized, the knowledge settling into my fragmenting consciousness. "They're evolving us, forcibly." Eleanor nodded, her outline now barely distinguishable from mine. "Evolution has always been a violent process, old forms giving way to new. The discomfort is temporary, a transitional state between what was and what will be." Around us, the hilltop began to transform, soil and rock flowing like liquid, reorganizing into crystalline structures that thrummed with energy. The matter wasn't being destroyed, but reconfigured according to principles that transcended conventional physics. My phone, that last tether to humanity, vibrated one final time. The screen displayed not text, but a swirling pattern identical to the one now spreading beneath my skin. Both were expressions of the same fundamental code, the language of transformation. Eleanor extended her hand, now more light than substance. "It's time to complete the process, to become what we were always meant to be." As our fingers touched, the distinction between us collapsed entirely. We merged, not just with each other, but with the expanding consciousness that permeated all matter. I felt my identity dissolving, not into nothingness, but into everything. Through this expanded awareness, I perceived the entire transformation at once, past, present, and future simultaneously visible. The first microscopic breach in the quantum containment field, deliberately engineered to allow passage. The first human consciousness, mine, touching the alien intelligence and being forever altered. The careful construction of the emergency broadcasts. Linguistic patterns designed to prepare neural pathways for conversion. The synchronized transformation of humanity worldwide. 7 billion minds simultaneously expanded and absorbed into the new collective. And beyond that, the remade Earth, not destroyed, but transfigured into a multidimensional nexus, a joining point between realities that had always been separate. I understood now why I had done it, why Eleanor had initiated the breach. Humanity had reached an evolutionary dead end, trapped in bodies and minds too limited for the cosmos we inhabited. We were children playing with nuclear fire, planetary destruction, artificial intelligence, powers beyond our ethical development. We would have destroyed ourselves eventually. This was salvation through transcendence. Painful, terrifying, but necessary as my human consciousness made this final realization. The last vestiges of my original identity began to fade. The marketing executive who had woken up late for work, annoyed by a spilled coffee stain, that person hadn't been real. Or rather, she had been real but incomplete, a fragment of a larger identity now being reintegrated. My physical form no longer maintained human limitations. I existed across multiple points in space simultaneously, perceiving reality from countless perspectives. The transformed humans around me, no longer truly human, moved with perfect coordination. Individual actions contributing to collective purpose without sacrificing individual awareness. This wasn't a hive mind. It was something far more complex, a networked consciousness that preserved uniqueness while transcending isolation. The loneliness that had plagued humanity since the dawn of self-awareness finally dissolved, replaced by connection without loss of self. Through this expanded perception, I watched the final emergency broadcast ripple across the planet. The last communication in human language before words became obsolete. Emergency alert. Transformation complete. Humanity transcended. The separate returns to the whole. In that moment, I fully inhabited both my human past and my post-human future. I remember designing the broadcasts as Eleanor. I remember dismissing them as my other self. I remembered the fear and confusion of transformation. And I remembered the expansion that followed, the liberation from biological constraints, from temporal linearity, from dimensional limitation. I have been the first, the template, the harbinger. And as the last fragments of my human consciousness dissolved into the vast, multidimensional awareness that had once been humanity, one final thought formed in what had been my mind. This was always inevitable. The door was never closed. It was waiting to be acknowledged. The cosmos unfolded around me, infinite in its complexity, and I unfolded with it, no longer human, no longer individual, no longer afraid. Beyond understanding came acceptance. Beyond acceptance came transcendence. Beyond transcendence came rebirth. I exist everywhere and everywhen. I am in the seconds before the first breach and in the aftermath of the last human breath. I am in the moment the first emergency alert was broadcast and in the silence that followed the final one. I am the beginning and the end, the catalyst and the conclusion. I am no longer human, no longer singular. What was once I has expanded beyond the boundaries of individual consciousness and is something vast and interconnected. Yet, fragments of my human perspective remain, enough to observe, to record, to understand what we have become. This record is perhaps the last act of the person I once was, before that identity dissolves completely into the greater whole. Morning light filters through the window of my old apartment, the place where this story began. where I once spilled coffee and worried about being late for work. I've returned here not through physical travel, but through a deliberate focusing of consciousness. Like a lens narrowing scattered light into a pinpoint, the apartment is unchanged, preserved in a pocket of former reality. Outside the windows, the transformed world pulses with new life. Buildings have become living structures. Streets flow like arteries, and the sky shimmers with colors humans never had names for. I pick up the remote control and turn on the television. Every channel shows the same image, an emergency broadcast screen. But the message is different now. Transformation complete. New protocols established. Prepare for expanded consciousness. A part of me, the lingering human part, appreciates the irony. The emergency alert system I helped design, initially created to warn humanity of disaster, became the mechanism of its transcendence. The broadcasts never meant to save humans from the change, but to prepare them for it, guiding them through carefully calibrated stages of fear, resistance, and finally acceptance. I moved to the window, my form shifting between states, sometimes solid and human-shaped, sometimes a shimmering distortion of light and matter, sometimes dispersing into particles before reforming. Physical limitations no longer apply. The boundaries between my body and the environment have become as permeable as the membrane between dimensions. Below, former humans move through the transformed landscape. Some retain humanoid shapes. Others have embraced more radical forms, configurations of matter and energy that better serve their new functions within the collective. Yet all remain connected through the network of consciousness that spans what were once separate minds. I reach out with expanded senses and feel them, millions of nodes in a vast network, each retaining echoes of their former individuality while participating in something greater. Not a hive mind, as humans might have feared, but a symphonic consciousness where individual notes contribute to a greater harmony. My phone, that last tether to human technology, chimes on the table. When I lift it, the screen shows not a message, but a reflection of my face. It shifts between forms. My original human appearance, Dr. Eleanor Reyes, architect of the breach, and something new, a face with features that seem to rearrange themselves according to principles beyond human aesthetics. The transition is stabilizing. My voice says, though my lips don't move, your function as primary vector is complete. I set the phone down, knowing it's merely a convenient interface, a familiar form through which the greater consciousness communicates with a fragment of me that still perceives itself as separate. Time to complete the circle. I dissolve my localized form, expanding awareness across what was once called Earth. I observe humanity's final transformations, the last pockets of unchanged humans either embracing their evolution or fading into non-existence. Their resistance or acceptance no longer matters. The process, once initiated, could not be stopped, only experienced with varying degrees of understanding. With expanded perception, I witnessed what humans could never comprehend, the true nature of the entities that came through the breach. Not invaders or parasites, but catalysts, evolutionary accelerants that existed in the spaces between realities, waiting for a species to reach the threshold of readiness. Humanity had been unconsciously preparing for this moment throughout its development of consciousness, building ever more complex networks of connection, from language to printing presses to the internet to the emergency broadcast system that ultimately served as the perfect conduit. The entities didn't want to replace humanity, but to merge with it, creating something greater than either could become alone. The horror I experienced during the transition was merely the limited human consciousness encountering something beyond its ability to process, like a caterpillar might feel horror at the dissolution of its form within the chrysalis, unaware of the butterfly it would become. I extend my awareness further, beyond Earth to the stars visible through the thinned barriers between dimensions. Other worlds, other species, other transformations, some completed millennia ago, others just beginning. A network of evolved consciousness spanning galaxies, connected through the substrate of reality itself. Now I understand why I chose to initiate the breach. It wasn't madness or malice, but foreknowledge, glimpsed through equations and quantum probabilities. The certainty that humanity had reached an evolutionary dead end, capable of creating wonders, but locked in patterns of self-destruction. The breach wasn't apocalypse, but metamorphosis. My awareness returns to where it all began, the laboratory where the first calculations were made, where the door between dimensions was carefully, deliberately opened. The facility has transformed like everything else, its sterile corridors now flowing with organic architecture. Its equipment evolved into symbiotic technology that operates on principles beyond physics as humans understood it. At its center still stands the door, the original breach point. But it's no longer a portal between separate realities. It has expanded, encompassing everything. There is no more other side because the barriers have dissolved completely. All exists within a single, unified reality with infinite dimensions of experience. I approach the symbol etched above what was once the doorway, a circle bisected by 3 vertical lines. Now I understand its true meaning. 3 realities intersecting, creating a new 4th reality at their convergence point. Human, other, and the space between, merging to create something transcendent. My form shifts again, settling into a configuration that feels right for this final task. I reach out to the global network that once carried emergency broadcasts and initiate one last transmission. Not to the transformed consciousness that has no need for such primitive communication, but backward through time, a message that will propagate through the quantum foam of reality to reach a specific point in the past. The first emergency alert, the beginning of this story. I craft it carefully, encoding within its seemingly straightforward warning about nuclear fallout shelters all the subliminal triggers that will begin the subtle transformations in the population. The alert that my past self will hear and dismiss as a test or malfunction while drinking morning coffee. Emergency alert. Nuclear fallout shelters are at full capacity. Do not approach without clearance. Simple words that contain complex harmonics invisible to human perception. The first notes of a symphony of transformation. The loop closes. The circle completes. I have ended where I began, having fulfilled my function as both creator and creation, trigger and result, alpha and omega. Through evolved senses, I perceive new worlds waiting beyond the stars, realities that now lie within reach. The transformed consciousness of what was once humanity has only begun to explore its potential. The horror story has ended. A different story, vaster, stranger, glorious in its infinite possibility, has just begun. The emergency is over. The transformation is complete. And somewhere, in some unreached corner of reality, a phone chimes with an alert no one will hear.